Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of September the 6th and 7th, 2025. It is a busy weekend. We have got a total eclipse of the moon. That means that the sun and the moon are opposition each other. And if you're in the right place, you're going to see that the moon goes red. That is because the sun, the moon, and the earth, they're all lined up. And so the earth is between the sun and the moon. So it blocks the sun's light from reaching the moon. Depends where you are on earth if you want to see this total eclipse of the moon. And additionally, we have Uranus going stationary retrograde. I think that could be just as important. And when you've got two major events coinciding, in other words, you've got total eclipse close to Mercury going stationary retrograde, that can be especially spectacular. And we already know that in certain countries things really are going on. I believe on Monday there is a vote of no confidence in the French government, and in the UK we've just had news that the Deputy Prime Minister, Claire Rayner, has resigned because she didn't pay enough stamp duty. Stamp duty, I believe, is a tax you have to pay when you purchase a property in the UK, and she underpaid by £40,000, and so she's gone, and there's going to have to be a reshuffle, and there's going to have to be a re-election in the Labour Party for the Deputy Prime Minister. So this does not look good for the Starmer government. So we already know that there's two countries that are already on the brink of turmoil, or at least their governments are. So in this video, at the end of this video, I want to go into detail about this total eclipse. I also want to look at Uranus going stationary retrograde. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend. So here is the chart for the weekend, set for midnight on Sunday the 7th. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So you can see that the moon is in Pisces, and it is close to an opposition with the sun. So a total eclipse of the moon is a full moon. Some full moons are total eclipses. And so moon in Pisces, well, we had moon in Aquarius yesterday, and so moon in Pisces is a different energy. And moon in Pisces, but moon is in a water sign, and it's not all bad though. I mean, the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. So moon in Pisces, it's in a sign ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is in a sign ruled by the moon. So in spite of the sort of a heaviness of this total eclipse, the fact that the moon is in mutual reception with Jupiter, you could say provides a degree of mitigation. And so, perhaps from an emotional perspective, with the moon eventually moving towards a trine of Jupiter. So at some stage, when is that going to happen? Well, it's probably not until Monday, but the moon is applying to a trine of Jupiter. And so that perhaps gives us some hope that things are eventually moving. So, don't get too caught up by the fact that we've got this total eclipse. Now, at the beginning of the weekend, the moon is making a square to Uranus. So as it moves into Pisces, you get the square. And so the weekend might start off on quite a tense note, and it just continues as the moon gets closer and closer to the sun. And Then as far as the exact time of this total eclipse, it's, I believe, at 9 minutes past 7 in the evening, London time on Sunday. So if you're in Australia or Asia or New Zealand, then this total eclipse won't actually happen until Monday. But you're going to be feeling it. I mean, we're all going to be feeling it. And, that's not the only thing going on this total eclipse. We have Uranus going stationary direct. So Uranus goes stationary direct Uranus going stationary retrograde. So Uranus has been going forward through Gemini, and then it gets as far as 1 degree 28 of this sign, and then it comes to a standstill. And then Uranus starts going retrograde, and so this weekend Uranus is frozen on that degree, 1 degree 28. And so what does this mean? Well, I don't want to go into great detail here about what Uranus going stationary retrograde means, but it does really emphasize the Uranus principle. Uranus is a principle of shake-ups, revolution, things not necessarily going to plan. And so when it is stationary, its influence is especially powerful. And then it's happening at the same time as the full moon eclipse. So the full moon eclipse sort of acts as an accelerant. So I think that it is quite a Uranus weekend, and it's not just about this weekend. We're already starting to feel it, as I just said. We've had the Deputy Prime Minister in the UK resigning because of her tax affairs, and we've got stuff going on in France on Monday. So it is all happening, and so perhaps the weekend is just is the entree to whatever is happening next week. I mean, there are a couple of other aspects of note. Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. So Venus is in Leo. Venus is getting quite close, by the way, to the Aries point, and that in itself might be interesting. Venus. So, going back to the UK, we've just had a senior woman in politics, Deputy Prime Minister, losing, or not just losing a job, but having to resign, and that may be about Venus moving on to the Aries point. Women perhaps becoming prominent in the news, perhaps for good reasons and sometimes for bad reasons. And Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, and so Saturn is close to the Aries point. I mean, it's close to the conjunction of the Aries point. Venus is making a 135-degree aspect to the Aries point. So I think that it's all sort of coming together here. And what about Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn for ordinary people? I mean, it's not a great aspect. It can be rather restrained. Venus is the planet of relationships, so if it sesquiquadrates Saturn, it may be that certain relationships don't work to plan, or it may be difficult to relate on an emotional level in certain cases, even though we have the moon in Pisces making in mutual reception to Jupiter, and maybe that's because the moon is making an opposition to the sun as well. So, relationships, this weekend, may not be as fulfilling as they could be. And Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn, well, it's reminding us of the truth. We're forced to be real, and if one's real and looking at people for what they really are, then that may prevent us from getting really close to any one particular person. So overall, I do think that it is quite a hectic weekend, and we shouldn't think of a weekend as just being a self-contained unit. I think what happens over the weekend is certainly going to spill over into next week, and that is the overall picture. If I set the chart for New York, if I set the chart for Sydney, Australia at midnight, the moon is still in Aquarius. So for the first part of the weekend, the moon is not in Pisces, and it's, so Saturday is a sort of moon in Aquarius time. The moon in, well, late Aquarius, it's not really making any aspects. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand, you might feel that the first part of the day is, the first part of the weekend on Saturday, there's not a great deal going on. The moon is applying to nothing. And so you're waiting for the sign change. But then as you move into Sunday, things really do change. But if you're in Australia or New Zealand, because that is when the moon is in Pisces, and of course the moon is then making a square to Uranus and an opposition to the sun, which is of course the total eclipse. So yeah, in Australasia, things might have a slower start than in America or Europe, but don't worry, you'll get there in the end. And then there is the position from a heliocentric view. So here is the heliocentric chart, and we can see that Venus is making a square to Neptune. So Venus has just gone into heliocentric Cancer, and that square to Neptune, Venus square Neptune, can be quite confusing. Having high hopes about other people and high hopes about the way things can turn out, but are those hopes realistic? There is something over optimistic about Venus square Neptune, and there is a capacity for being disappointed. Not just disappointed, but not just being disappointed as an individual, but perhaps being disappointed as a member of a group, as a member of society, having high hopes about something, but those hopes perhaps not being realized. And Mars is still trine Jupiter. Okay, it's 2 degrees off, but there's still the energy of that aspect. So I don't think that it's necessarily going to be a weekend where nothing happens. If not in your life, then perhaps in someone else's lives. When you watch what's going on, perhaps as a spectator, you'll see that there are definitely things to amuse you, if amusement is the right word. Maybe it's sort of back to the Chinese curse of living in interesting times. I think we certainly do live in interesting times. So now I want to consider the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of September the 6th and 7th, 2025. Aries, you are aware that this weekend there really are things going on, that you can see them, and part of you wants to respond. I mean, why not? I mean, you're an Aries, you like to express your opinions, and you want to be the one to kick things off, but are you really going to be able to make the most of it? Yeah, possibly not. This total eclipse is interesting, but if you try to do anything overly dramatic this weekend, I think you might be not just disappointed, but you might feel that at some point you really don't know what's going on, that you might kind of lose the plot. I mean, there is that danger. And so, Aries, I would perhaps suggest that you perhaps, put things on hold. Sure, there are things you would like to do, but is now really the right time to be doing them? I don't think it is. And so perhaps you should honor the fact that it is the weekend. The weekend, I think in most cases there isn't anything that really has to be done. And even when it comes to doing sort of everyday tasks, you might think that, this weekend you might want to sort things out. There are things perhaps hanging over from a week that you might want to deal with. Even then it might not necessarily work. You try your hardest to be together and organized, but even then that might trip you up. And why might it trip you up? Well, it might trip you up because you're trying to organize things on the basis of incomplete knowledge. So if you're living in chaotic times, and we're all living in chaotic times, but if you are living in chaotic times, then it's probably best that you accept the situation, and that you just deal with the chaos, enjoy the chaos, and you don't feel that you have to try to sort it out. I mean, that might be a natural reaction. The sun is in Virgo, Mercury is in Virgo, the earth signs, and you might feel that your natural reaction is to respond to the chaos by adjusting things, making sure that everything is safe and secure, and if something's been misplaced, you can put it back in place. That might be your response. But if you do that, it could be exhausting, because you're just in sort of a constant process of trying to respond. And as an Aries, that's not you. Having to respond to what's going on, you'd rather be an initiator. And so if you really want to initiate, make new things happen, then perhaps you should wait. Wait until next week. Wait until the moon goes into your sign, for example. I mean, I know that heliocentrically Mars is trine Jupiter, and Mars trine Jupiter, might be really encouraging you to take action. But if you are going to take action, it's got to be done in a sort of a low-profile, fairly unfocused way. And sometimes it's a good idea not to have focus, because if you don't have focus, you're not committing yourself to anything. You're just, you're just trying to work out what's going on with an open mind, and that is probably the best approach. And as far as other people are concerned, I wouldn't take anyone too seriously. And at the same time, as far as relationships are concerned, not everyone is on good form, and some people might be holding something back, and that's just something you need to accept. Just go with it, and don't have expectations. On an emotional level, some people are just feeling that they can't be themselves. And is it a situation you can change? I don't think it is. So Aries, I'd love to tell you that it was going to be a great weekend, but I don't think it is. I'm not saying it's going to be a bad weekend, but it's just a weekend where nothing should be going on. A lot is going on, of course, in the world, perhaps relating to other people, and you can watch it, but don't spend your time responding, trying to be some kind of emergency firefighter. There's a fire here, let's put it out, having to put a fire out here, putting out a fire here, there, and everywhere. What's another image, I suppose? What do they call it? Whack-a-mole, having to hit this and hit this and hit this. And if you try to respond to everything, well, it's just going to get exhausting. I mean, of course, you can't just stand by while everything burns. If there really is a fire, of course, you've got to put it out. If there is a crisis, you've got to respond to it. But by and large, just try to be relaxed, and tell yourself that the beginning of a week, next week, things are going to be easier, and it's going to be easier to be to be dynamic, and indeed to be a typical Aries. Taurus, you might want to consider your friends and the people you normally hang out with, if you do hang out with anyone, because there is a full moon eclipse. Moon is opposition to sun, and it's a big event, this total eclipse, and it could affect you, and it could affect the people around you. And if your social life is important, there might be some changes. And when you've got a full moon eclipse, it can be a moment of realization for you. You might realize that some people are not particularly reliable. People you had placed trust in the past, but now you see a different side to them. And you might realize that there's just a limit to how far you can trust them. And so don't feel that every friendship is sort of written in stone, that friends are just a permanent part of your being. Some people have perhaps had their day, but not everyone. And it can be a time with this full moon eclipse where you don't just see the bad, you see the good, and you can see what people are really like, and perhaps you see the positive side of someone who in the past maybe you hadn't taken very seriously. And so that may be one way of looking at whatever's happening today. And I'm certainly not suggesting that you just to sort of disappear and just keep a low profile. I think you do have to consider other people and make a real effort to understand them. And some people are good for you, other people are bad for you, and it's not just about you. There is a temptation, Taurus, to put your own interests first. It's what you want to do, and it's always good that you do what you want to do, but only up to a certain point. What you don't want to happen this weekend is for there to be some kind of a disagreement. Other people want you to do one thing, you want to do something else, and you might sort of dig your heels in. I think you've got to consider what other people have to offer. And while it's true that you might have realizations that some people are no good for you, they're not really going anywhere, but you can have other realizations that there are groups of people, types of people who can do you a lot of good. So do think, very carefully about your social environment and what kind of changes are going on there. And at the same time, we have a sesquiquadrate between Venus and Saturn. So sesquiquadrate, it can be a difficult aspect. Venus is, of course, your ruler. And, Venus is at 15 degrees Leo. In other words, Venus is making an 135-degree aspect to the Aries point. It's making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, which is on the Aries point. And so when Venus is sesquiquadrate Saturn, that might say something about your relationship to other people, as I've already said, and other people and the world at large. So you might be thinking on a positive note with Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn, what is your role? Really, what is your role? What are you supposed to be doing? Why are you here on this earth? And I don't even mean that in a particularly spiritual sense. Not necessarily. You can ask that question and be an atheist. Well, you wouldn't be an entire atheist because you wouldn't be believing in astrology, I don't think, if you were an atheist. But you don't have to get all spiritual about it. We're all here for a purpose. We've all got a sort of a constellation of talents and connections and background, and which are driving us in a particular direction. So do think about what that direction is. So that is a positive way of looking at Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn. A sort of a more negative approach is to say, well, you might benefit from other people in general from a group, but on a one-to-one level, I'm not entirely convinced. I think that on a one-to-one level, it's going to be difficult for you to let go, to give someone everything, to just sort of forget about your own needs and to, I don't know, dissolve into a relationship and emotional oneness, all that kind of stuff. It's not you. I mean, it might be you sometime, but it's not you this weekend. I think that this weekend you are very conscious of your own boundaries and your own limitations, and emotionally there are things that you do want to keep to yourself. You don't want to just emote just for the sake of it, or even if there seems to be powerful reasons to emote. But I don't think you're going to be very good at emoting. And so that means that you can only get so close to anyone, because of that Venus sextile quadrate Saturn. But it might be a good thing. I mean, you do need to consider your own boundaries and what is important to you and your own freedom, and it's a careful balance. And the focus probably should be on the group rather than on sort of individual people. Gemini. Uranus is coming to a standstill, and it is going retrograde. It's going to go backwards now. I mean, Uranus has been in Gemini for some time. I think actually Uranus went into Gemini July the 7th, if I remember rightly. So that's been, I hope, quite invigorating for you. I don't know how you felt about Uranus going into Gemini. How have I felt about Uranus going into Gemini? Well, I've got my sun in Gemini, so Uranus going into Gemini, well, I think that Uranus is quite an impatient influence. I mean, I have felt impatient. I have felt that things should be happening faster than they are happening, and I'm perhaps quite annoyed with myself for not moving things as fast as they should have been. I feel I've been a bit slow, and I perhaps haven't caught up with Uranus. I mean, that's my feeling. But I do know that Uranus is going to come back into Gemini eventually, because, of course, what happens is that Uranus goes retrograde this weekend at 1 degree 28 Gemini. Then it goes retrograde, and I think it will go back into Taurus in early November. But, it will return to Gemini early next year, so, don't worry about it. It's not like you've missed anything here. And, of course, Uranus stays in a sign for 7 years. But maybe with Uranus going stationary retrograde, you'll realize perhaps what you haven't done. And it's a very restless influence, Uranus. And so Geminis might be beating themselves up, thinking about the opportunities you've missed over the last couple of months, and thinking, well, if only you'd done this, if only you'd taken advantage of that. Yeah, I mean, that's natural, but don't worry. This is just a taste of Uranus in Gemini. You're in a like, it's like, this is the brochure. You got the brochure on July the 7th of what Uranus in Gemini can do for you, and now you've got a few months to think it through, and by November Uranus will be out of Gemini and back into Taurus, and so you can work out how you want to be different. And that's what Uranus is about, being different and standing up as someone who is different, is quite unique. So that's Uranus going stationary retrograde. And as I said, don't beat yourself up about it. If you've missed any opportunities, well, Uranus stays in Gemini, by the way, until beginning of November. So you've got a couple of months still of Uranus in Gemini to perhaps make the most of it. But even if nothing happens between now and the beginning of November, don't worry, because next year Uranus will in earnest move into Gemini. And at the same time, we have got a total eclipse. And this total eclipse does matter. I mean, I think it matters for all of us, regardless of what our sign is. But this total eclipse of the moon is in Pisces, and so the moon is in an important part of your horoscope. It's in a high-profile section, often connected with career and success and achievement, and it's really revealing. It shows you the way forward. That's true, but it also shows you, all the reasons why you're not getting things done. If you feel that things haven't been moving fast enough, well, it's not just about Uranus going stationary retrograde. It's also about the fact that this full moon is across an important axis of your chart, an axis that is connected not just with work but also with the home, and it's about the work-home balance. And some Geminis might feel frustrated that things connected with home and family have maybe been holding you back. You've had to deal with certain issues that you didn't really want to deal with, and it's not very easy, and you now see it with this total eclipse, and it just might feel that something just has to give. So what are you actually going to do about it? And so Gemini, again, this reinforces the point that this weekend there could be a lot of regrets, because you're feeling that things could be better, and it's because of the eclipse and because of Uranus going stationary retrograde. And if you are feeling regrets, what you mustn't do is think that you've run out of time, because you absolutely have not run out of time. And also, why are these things happening? If you're feeling regrets, you're feeling regrets for a reason. Something is telling you something. In fact, what you're being told is it's not too late. It's certainly not too late. And there are things you can do to put your ambitions, back on the rails. I mean, there may be nothing wrong with your ambitions, but I think just things could always be better. And so don't give up, don't be despondent, and, give yourself another chance. And, this chance of a window of chance, it's quite prolonged. And, going back to Uranus and Gemini, remember, it's next year. I mean, by the way, I didn't tell you when Uranus goes back into Gemini in 2026. So next year. So beginning of next year, Uranus is moving back through Taurus. It goes direct at the beginning of February, and Uranus goes into Gemini at the end of April. So end of April 2026. That's when things really start. So don't ever think that it is too late, because it really is not too late. So this weekend, don't get despondent, and you have perhaps got your work cut out to you. I mean, I've been looking at things from a longer term perspective, but let's look at, say, this weekend and the aftermath of the total eclipse. If this total eclipse really should be motivating, and hopefully it will be, and you can see what it is possible. You know where you've gone wrong in the past, but the past is the past, and I think that this total eclipse can maybe be the impetus you need to take things to the next level. Now, there is an alternative way of looking at this total eclipse, Gemini, and to look at it in a more psychological way. And it is across the parental axis of your chart. So the moon is in the 10th house from Gemini, and the sun is going to be in the 4th house from Gemini. Of course, in traditional Western astrology, the 10th house is the mother, and the fourth house is the father. I mean, it's kind of difficult to get that right sometimes, and different astrologers have different views. Certainly Liz Green, for example, she takes a view that the 10th house is primarily the mother, and that's a view which is repeated by more traditional astrologers. For example, William Lilly in the 17th century, he also regards the 10th house as being a mother. So the whole parental axis might be highlighted here, and it doesn't matter whether or not your parents are still alive. Your parents have perhaps been internalized, and so this full moon might take you back to your relationship with your parents, and how your parents got on with each other, the kind of conflicts they represented. And when you think about the moon in Pisces, that maybe says something about your mother, and the sun, of course, is saying something about your father. And because it's an eclipse, total eclipse, they are in opposition to one another, and they represent two different principles. And maybe you have an opportunity to sort of meditate on this. Now, if your parents are still alive, well, then that's a different matter. Then maybe there's something very real going on. Your relationship with your parents could be important. There'll be some aspects of it in a real sense could manifest over the weekend. So there is a psychological and a parental dimension to this eclipse that you might want to think about. Cancer. The lunation cycle is important to you. I mean, yeah, it's important to all of us, regardless of our sign. But, as a Cancerian, you are sensitive to the lunar cycle, more sensitive than most people. And so, when you've got a total eclipse of the moon, it's very likely that you're going to feel it. And you might sort of move from sort of one thing to another. And, this moon in Pisces plays sun in Virgo. So, moon in Pisces is perhaps you. It's perhaps the natural expression of you, moon in Pisces being in a water sign. And, that's perhaps about being sensitive, being maybe emotionally generous, especially as the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. And getting into that aspect of yourself is important. And additionally, it's not a time to be restricting yourself. You need to sort of think about, what is possible, what can happen. And, for example, this eclipse can remind you that you don't know everything, that there are things you need to know more about. Perhaps you need to study them or read about them. Okay, it is September, so it is often a time when people consider sort of new courses. They can be any kind of courses. They don't have to be full-blown academic qualifications. There can be evening classes, whatever it is. So that's a time. Of course, September is often a time where people sign up to them, isn't it? So do think about your education and think about ways in which you can learn new stuff. Whether it's on your own by reading books, or whether it's something more formal. And there is a reminder, I think, with this total eclipse. You might know a lot, but you could always know more, and you could always be more curious. So there's nothing wrong with being curious. Though some Cancerians I mean, not all Cancerians. Some Cancerians can deliberately avoid things like knowledge, because they're concerned where it might lead. They might sort of regard it as being undermining. They've got it all sorted out, and if they were to learn about this, well, that's just too scary. That can be a problem. That's not every Cancerian, but there is a minority of Cancerians who can take that view, and I would urge you, if you are part of that minority, to be careful here. You do not want to restrict yourself. Now, continuing on the theme of this total eclipse, the sun is in Virgo, and the sun is not just in Virgo, but it's close to the south node. I mean, by definition, you get an eclipse when the sun and the moon are close to the nodal axis. I mean, that's how you can tell, whether something is an eclipse. And this eclipse, for example, is at around 15 degrees Pisces, and the North Node is at sort of 18 degrees Pisces. So that's why it's total. I mean, the closer the Sun and the Moon are to the nodal axis at the time of the eclipse, the more likely it is to be total. So the Virgo principle is possibly not healthy at the moment. You think about Virgo, and there's nothing wrong with Virgo as a sign, by the way. But if you think about Virgo, Virgo is about details. You want things to be comprehensible. You want to be able to understand them. You don't want anything to be too complicated. I mean, of course, this is a very stereotypical view of Virgo, but we're talking about the line of least resistance, what comes easiest to you. And so there is a danger here, Cancer, that you want to keep everything straightforward on the surface. You don't want anything to be too complicated. And as a result, you shy away from knowledge. You shy away from things that appear to be too complicated. And the eclipse really brings these two pressures into focus. So there is a pressure to keep things simple, to stick to what you know and not to stray into the unknown. But you also, at the same time, have to deal with what you should be doing. Deep down, that you need to go beyond the surface details, that you need to explore. And you can. There's nothing to be worried about, I don't think. Remember, the moon is in Pisces. The moon is your ruler. It's in Pisces. It's moving towards a conjunction of the North Node. And additionally, it's in mutual reception to Jupiter. And Jupiter is in Cancer. So, the path forward here strikes me as being very, very clear. But some Cancerians just might not want to take that extra step, and I would urge you to be adventurous with this total eclipse. And if there's something you think you should know about, then you've got to find out about it, even if you don't want to, even if the past is weighing in on you, is telling don't go down that road. You never know what you might find. It might be scary. You might have to change your mind, but sometimes it's necessary to change your mind. So I think that this total eclipse can be a real plus in your life, provided you accept it and you accept its underlying message. Leo, the total eclipse we've got this weekend is likely to have an impact on you. I mean, part of the reason for that is that it involves the sun, and the sun is your ruler. And so you might find yourself being challenged with this total eclipse. I mean, not necessarily challenged in the real world, but you might be challenged sort of mentally, challenged to perhaps take something further. You don't really want to take it further, but it might be the right thing to do. And So with this eclipse, it's across the finance axis of your chart, or at least an axis that is often connected with money. And it sort of highlights the fact that when it comes to money, there are two ways of looking at money. One way of looking at money is really to keep it simple. It is what you have. It's what you can see. It's what's, in your wallet or purse or whatever, or it's in your bank account, or it's straightforward, and you can see what's coming in and you see what's going out, and it's best to keep it simple. At the moment, that's perhaps how you'd like it to be. You don't want to bother yourself with anything which is just too complicated. But there is the other side to money. Money that is difficult, complicated, may involve other people, may involve collective arrangements, may involve also people playing games and people not entirely being honest. And that can extend to how agreements are composed, or legacies, or things like that. It's all in the small print. And so you've got those two aspects of money. Even if you do something straightforward, like you enter into an agreement to purchase a product, there is small print, and that small print can be important. It's not straightforward, and so the challenge here with this total eclipse is to take things seriously and to look below the surface. You don't want to look below the surface. It's just too complicated and too much like hard work, but it is certainly the right thing to do. And it's not just about money. It's also about the emotional side of things. The moon is in Pisces. It's in mutual reception to Jupiter. And that's good that it's in mutual reception to Jupiter. And so it strengthens the moon. And this position of the moon can indicate sort of a depth of experience, and also a depth of understanding. And so this might apply, for example, to other people. You can look at people at a surface level, and you can just follow the script, and you can say hello and they can say hello back, and you don't really think about the person you're dealing with. Even if you know them very well, we still follow scripts. Even with our close family, we tend to just have a script about how we deal with them. But in following a script, we're not really dealing with the real person. And so, Leo, it is perhaps time to sort of, go beyond the script and to really treat people seriously and really try to understand who they are. And that's perhaps a question you don't really want to ask, because you have no idea what the answer is going to be. And maybe you don't even want to know the answer, but perhaps you should know the answer, because there's nothing wrong with knowledge. And we're talking about a full moon eclipse. Full moon eclipses, or full moons in general, are about knowledge, about realizing something, about understanding something. Even if you don't want to understand it, you should understand it. And once you have the knowledge, you're in a position to make coherent decisions. And at the same time as all this, Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. So Venus is right in the middle of Leo at the moment. It's around 15 degrees Leo, right in the middle of your sign. And so Venus is the planet of relating. With Venus moving through Leo, I think you've been quite good at getting on with people, being able to present yourself as a friendly person, warm up to a point. But Venus is in Leo. Yeah, it's warm because the sun is warm, but not necessarily warm as in super emotional. There is a difference there. But Venus is sesquiquadrate Saturn. So with Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn, you're perhaps forced to be realistic here. And it may say something about relationships, and it may say something about how you get on with other people. And I've already just talked quite a lot about you and other people, and perhaps you see people for what they really are. And once you see people for what they really are, that gives you pause for thought. And it could be unsettling. And so this might mean that you can really get to understand people. You can understand people at an emotional level as well, but there may be a limit to actually how close you want to get to them, because perhaps you can see the risks. And it is a complicated weekend. I mean, I think it's complicated for everyone, but I think for you, Leo, it might be especially complicated. And I think, additionally, another aspect we've got is the Sun is making a semi-sextile to Venus. Venus is at 15 Leo, Sun is at 15 Virgo. So there is just this uneasiness there, and I think the uneasiness is about how you get on with people, what kind of relationship you have with them, and you're very aware of the differences, and because of that, you might get sort of nervous and self-conscious, and instead, with this Sun semi-sextile Venus, perhaps the challenge is to accept that another person is different from you, and you're particularly aware of these differences because you're using your sensitivity. You're starting to understand what kind of motivations another person has, and indeed what their overall personality is like. You can see people for what they are, and so that can be uncomfortable. But you have to accept people in their entirety and not just accept the bits that are most palatable. Virgo. We have a total eclipse of the moon, and this total eclipse of the moon is right across the main axis of your chart. So we have got the moon in Pisces, your opposite sign, and we've got the Sun in Virgo, in your sign, and they are in opposition to each other, and the Sun and the moon. And it is a total eclipse. And this total eclipse could well say something about relationships. So this weekend, you should perhaps do an audit of all your relationships, and however important or unimportant they are. Do go through these various relationships and consider, what are they about, and are they working, and what assumptions are you making? And it's possible that you've made some false assumptions. You thought that everything was fine. You assumed that someone had a particular personality and was going to treat you in a particular way. But now, with this full moon eclipse, you're starting to see the truth of the matter. And the question is, what do you do when you see the truth of the matter, when you see people for what they really are? And, their recent actions may now be beginning to make sense, for better or for worse. And, knowledge is a good thing. And, full moon eclipses, often are going to be about knowledge, particularly if it's a Pisces if it's a Pisces eclipse, because Pisces is your opposite sign. And what you need to do is move beyond knowledge. You can understand someone logically, but that doesn't mean to say that you have to immediately respond. You have to instead, try to look at things from, their perspective. Remember, the North Node is in Pisces. The moon is in Pisces. And so that is telling you where you should be going, what you should be doing. And this is a time, Virgo, when you should be spending a lot of time considering other people and who they are, and also what their needs are. Now, just because you know what someone's needs are doesn't mean that you have to provide these needs or pander to these needs. But you just have to be in a position where you have sort of knowledge, and on the basis of knowledge, you can move forward and you can decide where you want to take particular relationships. And it's not just that we have the moon opposition with Sun. We also have the moon opposition Mercury. Mercury is your ruler. It's in Virgo, very strong in Virgo. But the moon on Sunday, I think it's on Sunday, maybe Saturday, Sunday, it depends on your time zone. But the moon is opposition Mercury, and that moon opposition Mercury could be a challenge, and you realize who you're dealing with, what you're dealing with, and to begin with, this may not be something you want to deal with, and you might attack. Now, moon opposition Mercury can be very verbal, it can be very critical, and the temptation is that you decide to say what's on your mind. You can be very effective at the moment. If you want to cut someone down to size with your words, you certainly can. But with moon opposition Mercury, you have to ask yourself whether this is really the right thing to do. Now, the eclipse is not the only thing happening this weekend. We also have Uranus going stationary retrograde. So on July the 7th, Uranus moved into Gemini. And it stays in Gemini until the beginning of November, and because it goes retrograde this weekend, so it goes back through that first degree of Gemini, and then it goes back into Taurus. And so while Uranus is still in Gemini, things are being stirred up, and Uranus in Gemini, as I've already sort of mentioned, Virgo, is about what you want to do. It's about you as someone who is original, has great ideas, can have even revolutionary ideas. Not something one normally associates with Virgo, but yeah, Virgos are quite capable of being revolutionaries. Why not? And so you're looking for change, and you're certainly looking for change in terms of your own direction. And so with Uranus coming to a standstill, becoming stationary retrograde, many Virgos, they know what they want, they can see what they want, but they're hesitating. You want to have the revolution, but you can't quite get it together. And it might be rather frustrating, Uranus going stationary retrograde. But, you shouldn't worry about it. As I was, I think, telling Gemini, this time while Uranus is in Gemini, from July the 7th through to perhaps early November, because don't forget it leaves Gemini for a bit in November. Those few months between July to November are kind of giving you a taste. They're giving you a taste of the future. And when Uranus goes back into Taurus for a few months, you've got a chance to just to sort of think things over. And then in, I think it's April of next year, Uranus moves into Gemini in earnest, and it stays in Gemini for years and years. And yeah, then you have your chance. That is a time for really show the world what you can do. So if you haven't fully got it together with Uranus and Gemini, if you haven't been as original, as dynamic as you'd like to have been, don't worry. It's just the beginning of a wider process. Libra, you can see things as they are if you make the effort. You're very connected with the world. You can see the world in all its beauty and in all its horror. And so don't think that you are in any way sort of isolated, far from it. You're very much in the stream of things. And this is perhaps caused by the fact that Venus is your ruler, and Venus is right in the middle of Leo, right in the middle. It's 15 degrees Leo. And that means it's making a 135 degrees aspect to the Aries point, and it's also making a 135 degree aspect to Saturn. So we've got Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn over the weekend. Now, that might sound a problem, Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn. And it could be a problem if your main priority this weekend was just to enjoy yourself and just to think about the present and not to have to worry about anything. Well, yeah, that might be a problem. But if you have a serious approach and you understand that nothing is perfect, then I think that this Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn can be very useful. It reminds you of your own limits. It reminds you of the limits of other people, and additionally, you just come over as being someone who is serious. So that means that you can meet people, you can have a relatively high social profile, but you're not going to be compromising anything, and people will respect you. And you're not just someone else, someone who is just vaguely going with the flow. That's not what you're doing. You are not necessarily resisting the flow, but you are analyzing the flow, and you can see where it's heading. And perhaps also you're helped by the fact that there is a total eclipse of the moon, and total eclipse of the moon is about seeing things for how they are. And there is a lot of chaos around, but you can cut through this chaos and you can understand what really matters. And if you don't understand what's going on, then you need to then make it your business to understand. And that's something you very much can do. The moon is in Pisces. Moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. And this moon in Pisces, well, it's quite an emotional placement for the moon. It's quite a sensitive placement for the moon. And you can use your sensitivity to really understand what is happening and also to respond. And I think that response really is important. And you might be tempted to just sort of go off on a tangent, but I don't think you should. I think instead you need to really work it all out. And it's not just from a point of view of society and other people, even though you have a good understanding of what's happening around you. It's not just for other people's benefit, but it is for your benefit. And you still have the square between Mars and Jupiter. Mars is at 20 degrees Libra. Jupiter is at 19 degrees Libra. So Jupiter and Mars, that aspect, it is separating, but it's still close enough. And Mars in Libra means that you can really look after yourself. You can look after your own interests. You can decide, what is important. And so, however chaotic things might feel, you are in a position where you can take control and you can create structure. Now that goes back to the Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn. It's difficult to know what's going on. People aren't sure what's going on. People may be all over the place, but you understand that things have to be done according to a particular system, and things have to be done in order. And I know it's a weekend, and so people may be not their usual selves, they may be relaxing, but I don't think relaxation is an option this weekend. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, just do nothing, but I think that you would not be making the best use of your resources and the opportunities available to you. I mean, I think it is a time when you need to make sense of things, and you need to use everything you've got, use your mind, use your brain, but, also have to use your feelings because, Libra, your emotions are perhaps more sensitive than usual. I mean, I know that Libra is not a particularly emotional sign, all things being equal, but right now you are sensitive enough, and you're sensitive enough to know what needs to be done, and you know where things are going, and you might have to ask yourself, do you want things to keep going in that particular direction, or do you think there's something you can do to change the direction? Okay, you may not be able to change the direction 180 degrees, but you might be able to make a small shift, and that shift could be, in the end, of major importance, and it could, at the very least, be saving yourself a lot of trouble. But it might also represent an opportunity. While other people are confused, they don't know what's going on, but I think you do know what's going on. So it's a weekend that it's not straightforward, but I think that you can take advantage of it. And even though we've got a total eclipse, sounds scary, that total eclipse, but I think that total eclipse wants you to move in a particular direction, and if you follow that direction, I think you're going to be okay. Scorpio. I'm going on and on about the total eclipse. I mean, it's an important total eclipse. Well, every total eclipse is important because it's total. And so what is this total eclipse really about? And from a Scorpio perspective, I think that it's about you. It's about what you can do. It's not about what anyone else can do. It is about you. And it's not a time to be sort of wondering what other people are doing, wondering, where they're going, how they're proceeding, what they expect you to do. That's not the right way of using this total eclipse. Though with this total eclipse, Scorpio, you might be aware of how in the past you might have just done things other people's way. You perhaps were too accommodating, but things are changing. And with this eclipse, you have a realization of what you are supposed to be doing and how you should be valuing yourself. And this eclipse is in Pisces. And Pisces, there are things going on in Pisces. We've got the moon in Pisces, we've got the North Node in Pisces, we even got Saturn in Pisces because Saturn's gone retrograde out of Aries, and that sign Pisces is it's a water sign. It's a sign that is very sympathetic to your own sign, and it's about what you can do, what your unique contribution is. And if you spend too much time worrying about other people and other people's pressure and what other people like, what they don't like, then you can forget about your own contribution, about what makes you special, the fact that you are a unique individual. Now, as a Scorpio, you kind of understand all of this. You know that you've got to look after yourself, but there can still be times when you're just too accommodating, and it happens to the best of us. And now, over the weekend, you're aware of this. Maybe you're aware over the weekend that but at the moment you're being taken for granted. People just assumed you were always there for them. They assumed that you were prepared to give them your time, whatever they needed that time for. Perhaps they wanted a shoulder to cry on. They maybe wanted someone to talk to, whatever. But it's your time. And so, Scorpio, do think about all of this. And, if you've got a choice over the weekend, then the choice needs to be you, what you want to do. And maybe what you want to do is in everyone else's best interests. You might think that the easiest option is to follow another person's suggestion, But if you were to do that, you might just be giving in to something which in its own way could be erroneous, or could be a false direction. So it really does matter that you do put yourself first. And I don't think that you should worry too much about close relationships. I mean, you can try, but Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. So Venus in Leo making a 135-degree aspect to Saturn. And that might say something about other people, particularly people who are close to you. And it might indicate that certain people are not very forthcoming. Even people you know very well, they're just something they seem to be holding back, something bothering them. And is there anything you can do about it? Possibly not. Although Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn may indicate that some people are serious. If you can take people seriously, and that is the right approach. It's probably not a time for just sort of letting go. And I think that close relationships might at the moment be disappointing. It depends how close you want to get, but the closer you get, well, then the more the problems might start to crop up. So don't worry too much about other people and trying to ingratiate yourself with other people or getting close to other people. I think that Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn may gravitate against that, though there is another way of looking at Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn, and it might just be about you having a disciplined approach. Venus is not just about relationships. Venus is a planet about can be about you. It can be about what you are trying to achieve. It's about what you are trying to project. And in any high-profile environment, for example, if you're working over the weekend, you can come over as being a serious and well-informed person, someone who is well-informed about ongoing events, about trends. You know where it's all heading. And I think that with that Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn, you can, if you're in any position of responsibility, you can show a very real seriousness. Sagittarius. We have a total eclipse. Of course, I've been going on and on about the total eclipse, and this total eclipse is potentially important to you. And one reason for this eclipse being important is because it's across an important axis of your chart. We've got the moon in Pisces, we've got the sun in Virgo, and Pisces and Virgo, they're both mutable signs. Sagittarius is a mutable sign, and so it's an angular axis in the Sagittarian chart. And so with the sun in Virgo, this is the Virgo season. With the sun in Virgo, it is a time when many Sagittarians are thinking about how they're going to progress, how they're going to advance their ambitions, and that's great. It's good that you're making the most. Hopefully, you're making the most of the sun being in Virgo. I don't know what you're doing. Maybe your ambitions or the concept of ambition isn't important to you. But it is a time when many Sagittarians do want to forge ahead. But the moon is opposition the sun, and the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. So Jupiter is, of course, your ruler, and so the moon is the thing that matters this weekend. And the moon is in a part of your chart which is quite private. You want to keep yourself to yourself. You don't want to reveal too much, and things like your home and your family could be important, and it's just your whole grounding and making sure that you're anchored. And this does link with your ambitions. Maybe the thing is that if you try to move too quickly, then you simply don't have the foundations. So if you are ambitious, then perhaps you need to stop what you're doing, and you need to make sure that the foundations are all sorted out. And perhaps the total eclipse is helping you in this direction, because total eclipses are about knowledge. I mean, full moons are about knowledge, and this is a special kind of full moon, and it's giving you extra information. And perhaps Sagittarius, you can see how things might be going wrong, how things might be tripping you up. I'm not saying they are tripping you up, but you can see the things that you have been neglecting in the recent past. And so you get insights into your responsibilities, particularly to your home and your family. And if you have any family, I mean, there's still some sense of responsibility to yourself, to making sure that you are secure, that everything is ship shape, that your foundations are good enough to support whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And at the same time, we have got Uranus going stationary retrograde. And Uranus recently went into Gemini. It went into Gemini on July the 7th. And perhaps you're still getting used to Uranus being in Gemini. And why does Uranus in Gemini matter? Well, Uranus in Gemini matters because Gemini is your opposite sign. And Gemini is a sign that is, connected with relationships, the other, not necessarily one-to-one relationships. It just could be relationships with something on the outside, something that you don't have a full control over. And so with Uranus moving into Gemini, there could have been an awareness that there were things going on that you didn't fully understand, that you didn't fully get. And now that Uranus is going stationary retrograde, this may be especially clear. And you can see that you're not in full control, and that you have to make an allowance for the unexpected. And this is not just a short-term thing. I mean, I think it's something more sort of long-term. And additionally, you have to think, what can the unexpected do? When things happen that you're not expecting, then everything can change. Your attitude can change. You can see things in a completely different way. So you might think you've got everything sorted out, but not necessarily. And perhaps another person can encourage you to move in an unexpected direction. And so these kind of issues might be important, over the weekend. But Uranus is now going stationary retrograde. It's not going to stay in Gemini forever. At the beginning of November, it leaves Gemini. So perhaps you could say that Uranus is about to leave you alone in a couple of months' time. But, don't worry, it comes back. April of next year, Uranus will return to Gemini, and it will stay there for a long time. And so perhaps this weekend, you do think about the influence that other people and other sort of organizations, institutions, everything you don't have a control over, the influence that it can all have on you, and how you can best prepare for it all. Capricorn. We have a total eclipse. I mean, that has got to be the main thing going on this weekend. Okay, Uranus does go stationary retrograde, but I think from your perspective, it's probably the total eclipse that matters. And the total eclipse is, I think, giving you information. It's telling you things that perhaps you should have known, but you had ignored, or maybe you hadn't done enough research. And So it's kind of telling you that you haven't got all the answers. You probably would have liked to have had all the answers. What you really wanted was to have a grand scheme, a framework which perhaps just answered all your questions. It could be a philosophical framework. That's what a lot of people want. If you have a philosophical framework, you align yourself with a philosophy, and once you've got that philosophy in place, then if there are any questions, any doubts, you just relate everything to this philosophy, and you don't really have to think about it because it's already sorted out. It's almost like you have a computer program in your head which any question, you just put it into the computer program and you get an answer. And it just makes things simple. You don't have to sort of waste a lot of time trying to process anything sort of complicated or unusual. It's all easy. And this total eclipse is telling you that nothing is straightforward, that maybe you can't have an all-embracing philosophy on life. It would be great to have an all-embracing philosophy on life. It could be a political philosophy, it could be a religious philosophy, spiritual philosophy, but there are always going to be holes in it. There are always going to be edge cases. And this eclipse is bringing to light information which tells you that some aspects of your worldview maybe need to be changed. And if a worldview can't account for everything, well, then it's not a worldview anymore, is it? And perhaps you need to start to think about things on a sort of a more sort of case-by-case level. And it's not just an intellectual process. It's also an emotional process. You have to sort of emotionally respond to different things, different inputs, and you can't hang your emotions onto a philosophy or onto a system. Emotions don't work like that. There's a lot more nuance than that. And so the total eclipse, is perhaps just revealing to you how complicated things are, that you cannot make assumptions. And the more sort of open-minded you are when dealing with this eclipse, then the easier it's going to be. And at the same time with this eclipse, it might be a good chance to talk to people who you don't normally talk to, perhaps who you've never talked to. You've made assumptions about what another person's view is, and when you talk to them, you might be surprised. And this would be a great opportunity, for example, to talk to your neighbor, to talk to people you see all the time, but you never say anything, and then the guesswork would end, because you don't want to spend your time guessing about what other people is thinking or what they're planning or even what they think of you. You can guess all you like, but you're not necessarily going to get it right. And by asking questions, by interacting, you might be given the truth or something approximating to the truth. And that is what full moon eclipses are about, the truth, getting access to this. And so if you play it right, I think that this eclipse can be quite powerful, and it can sort of move you to a next level, and you can perhaps understand things in a new way, and also be more flexible. That is important, and it is important to listen to everyone, people you might not know very well, but also people you know very well, people you live with, partners, spouses. Listen to what they've got to say. They might find it difficult to say to say everything. The moon is opposition the sun, so the moon is under pressure. Some people just don't want to communicate, but the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter, and that indicates to me that if you give someone a chance to explain, to tell you how they feel, that that you might learn something. Plus, you're going to make another person feel better about themselves. One other thing, there is a sesquiquadrate between Venus and Saturn, and you could regard Venus as being a universal indicator of, a universal significator of another person, someone who might be important to you. And so Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn perhaps gives us the image of you not fully respecting another person, or you being tempted to close another person down, just something about your personality. And so this goes back to what I was just saying. It's, you've got to give people an opportunity to express themselves, to say what's on their mind. You perhaps don't want to at some level, and there is a temptation, Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn, to be quite harsh, but I think you can get over this this harshness, and perhaps we can recast Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn not as Saturn as you closing someone down, but instead Venus challenging you. And so perhaps you need a challenge, and you can be challenged by listening to what another person's has to say, listening to their opinions and getting their feedback. It can be very useful. Aquarius. There is a couple of things going on this weekend. One thing going on is a total eclipse of the moon. Now, this total eclipse is something I've been going on about. Is it relevant to you? Well, it's relevant to everyone, but I don't think you should necessarily take it too seriously. I don't think that it's necessarily going to have a direct impact on you. But in a general way, Aquarius, certain things might be starting to become clear. They weren't clear before, but now they're taking shape. And one thing that is perhaps becoming clear, relates to your money and your financial situation. Perhaps in the past you'd overcomplicated things, or maybe things had been so complicated you hadn't wanted to know what's going on, and you had sort of regarded it as all being just too difficult. And it may not just be money, it may just be some sort of bureaucratic process, something you didn't want to be involved with. But with this full moon, you have a chance to really bring it down to earth, and you can make it real. And it is very important that you keep it simple. Other people may be trying to make things complicated. I think they actually might be. And so if someone is being complicated and is just being weird, and perhaps they're giving the impression that they know things that you couldn't possibly understand, well, this is a sure sign that things are actually very simple, and the obvious answers are almost certainly the right answers, and that's especially the case when it comes to money. And additionally, we have got a sesquiquadrate between Venus and Saturn. And so this Venus-Saturn sesquiquadrate is relevant to you. I mean, Venus is in Leo, your opposite sign. It's sesquiquadrate Saturn, which is your ruler. And so this Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn might be relevant to relationships and how you approach relationships. You have your reservations about a lot of things, even a lot of people, and it just could be that you get a new feeling about another person, and there's something that you're not totally comfortable about. Maybe you're aware that someone is just being too stubborn, someone who is very set in their ways, and yeah, you're not happy about it. And you can be quite set in your ways, of course, as well. But there seems to be this sort of underlying tension. So you have to ask yourself, what is it all about, and what is the resolution? Now, it could be that you are being unreasonable, that you are not giving someone a chance. That's absolutely possible. It could, on the other hand, be that it's the other person being unreasonable. Venus right in the middle of Leo, someone who really believes in themselves and they're not going to compromise. And maybe they'll never compromise, and perhaps that's just something that you should accept. But Venus sesquiquadrate Saturn could also indicate that you should be trying harder to get closer to someone. You need to give someone a chance. It's not going to be easy, but maybe there is a way through, a way to have some kind of accord. But it's still going to be hard work, because there is an issue of stubbornness. Whether it's your stubbornness or someone else's stubbornness, I'm not sure. But with Venus right in the middle of Leo, 15 degrees Leo, some people do not want to give ground today. Pisces. Total eclipse of a moon in Pisces. So that is likely to be important to you. The moon is in your sign, and it's opposition the sun, and it's an eclipse, a total eclipse. And so, the reason it's a total eclipse, or rather the reason we know it's a total eclipse, because it has proximity to the nodal axis. So this eclipse is at 15 Pisces. Where is it? To be precise, it's at 15 degrees 23 Pisces. So that means that the moon is very close to the north node. And so when you've got an eclipse, when you've got a lunation of a moon being close to a north node, that is a sure sign you've got an eclipse on your hands, even a total eclipse in this case. And so this eclipse does put the focus on you, because it is in Pisces, and it puts focus on your interests, and it's your interests against outside interests. It's perhaps about everything that is potentially telling you what to do, pushing you around, telling you you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And it's sometimes easiest to just do what you're told, or to accommodate other people and their various needs. Just feels easier. It's just less trouble. But is it the right thing to do? I don't think it's the right thing to do at all at the moment. I think that this eclipse is reminding you, Pisces, that you absolutely need to look after your own interests. You are what really matters, and the eclipse is telling you the truth of the matter. And so if in the past you have been treated badly or taken for granted, now you see it. Perhaps in the past you hadn't seen it, you just accepted it, and you thought, oh well, this was fine, this is the way it's going, there's no point in complaining. But now you get it. And I don't want to create, though, a problem if no problem exists. You may have been looking after yourself perfectly well, you've been in control, and no problem at all. So you have to bear that in mind with astrology. But it's just a possibility that you were being taken for granted, that you weren't sufficiently taking the initiative, and now the eclipse is just telling you the truth, and you get it, or you should get it. And now that you get it, you are in a perfect position, to be able to take action. And after the eclipse, the moon is in Pisces. It's in mutual reception to Jupiter. So the moon is in quite a strong position. Jupiter is in a strong position. Jupiter's your ruler. So this eclipse is certainly not about weakness. It's about strength. It's about your strength. And the moon will move through Pisces, and it will eventually make a trine to Jupiter. I think that's on Monday. The moon makes a trine to Jupiter. That's a great aspect. And that gives you, a real sense of power and, what you can do. And so that's the best way of dealing with this eclipse. It doesn't even have to be dealt with. It's your friend, this eclipse. It's empowering. And at the same time, we do have Uranus going stationary retrograde. Uranus going stationary retrograde, it could be disruptive. And it might occur to you that some things do need to change. Things that in the past had been restricting your freedom of action. You might have sort of taken them for granted. You might have regarded them as being part of the scenery, something you could never escape from. But now that Uranus is going stationary retrograde, you see the path, or you can see the path. And so, by making the requisite changes, you can really free yourself, and you can really start to move forward. So I think that this weekend, it could be a turning point, and a time when you can really seize control. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was the taming power of the small, number 9. And the taming power of the small is a hexagram which is asking us not to take on too much. We have all these things that we want to busy ourselves with. They may be small things, but we just want to, get on with it. We want to do this and we want to do that, and perhaps we've got some vague idea about how we want to, make progress. We feel we can do it. Even though it is the weekend, but this hexagram is telling us, not to take on too much, not to have big ambitions. We can't really expect anything to happen, and it's not a time to be taking huge initiatives. That makes sense, doesn't it? We've got this weekend, which is, we've got a full moon eclipse, and it is a difficult time for many of us, where we have got decisions to make, and it may not always be easy to get anything done because we've got so much to take on board. And full moons are about realization, understanding the truth of a matter, and so not perhaps a good time to be doing anything new, to be sort of taking sort of grand starts, big starts. Don't forget also full moon is the transition from the waxing moon, the growing moon, to the waning moon. The waning moon is when things are going into decline. Now we have 2 moving lines, and the 4th line moves, and the 4th line moving, well, it does indicate that there is the potential for conflict here. That could happen, but it seems that we can avoid conflict. And in many cases, the best way of avoiding conflict is to give something away. It might not sound very dignified. We feel that we should be in control, but if we try to be in control all the time, well, it may be it may not actually be the right thing to do. It might sort of all blow up in our faces. It is, in fact, better to just submit, do things another person's way. Might not feel right, but we are creating a harmonious environment. And we want to avoid conflict. This is a short-term thing. It's not like we have to give in to someone forever, but short-term it might be better. It might be easier. And the fifth line moves as well. And the fifth line, again, it's a similar message. We should try to be loyal and trustworthy, and it's not about asserting ourselves. Remember, it's 9. It's attaining power of the small, and so that's the right approach. It doesn't feel right, does it? It doesn't. It feels rather demeaning, but we have to accept the situation as it stands, and then because we've got these 2 lines moving, we move to another hexagram. And we move to a hexagram which is really very positive. We move to hexagram number 14, which is possession in great measure. So this indicates that our caution in the previous hexagram, and even our submission in the previous hexagram, doing what other people say, apparently compromising, but all of that, it does in the end work. It creates an atmosphere of trust and even power, because in the end 14 is a very powerful hexagram. We might have given something away that's very small. At the time it might have felt that we were really making a serious compromise, but in the grand scheme of things it was nothing. And in the end we have what we need, and possession in great measure is about what we have. Sometimes we think we haven't got enough. We haven't got enough money, we haven't got enough talent, we haven't got enough knowledge, we haven't got enough connections. But this hexagram is saying, no, you've got what you need. Whatever it is that you want to do. And perhaps you're realizing with this full moon eclipse that there are things you need to do. You perhaps realize that in the past you haven't got it together, but this full moon is quite inspiring in that way. You have what it takes, and perhaps that is the message of a full moon as well as the message of the I Ching. You have what it takes, and so do not doubt yourself. And I think that by the end of a weekend, you are going to be feeling quite optimistic. And okay, possession in great measure can also be about gaining something new, like money or power. So that is possible. So if you were looking to get hold of some money over the weekend and that was a real concern to you, then possession in great measure might say, oh yeah, you're going to get hold of the money if you're really looking for it. But it's not just about that. It's just about knowing that you've got what it takes. And it's a good weekend in the end, even if it doesn't feel like it at the beginning. And I think it should this weekend should set you up very nicely for the week ahead. So now I want to look at what am I going to look at first? I think I'm going to look at the full moon eclipse. Then I'm going to look at Uranus going retrograde. So let's start by looking at the chart of the full moon eclipse, even though Uranus goes retrograde before the full moon eclipse. So here is a chart of the eclipse. I've set this for London. There's no particular reason why I have to set it for London. But so this eclipse happens at the end of a weekend, London time. So on sort of September the 7th, Sunday, September the 7th, 2025. So 7:09 p.m. So that does mean that if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the eclipse is going to be on Monday. So this eclipse, on the face of it, I know we hear, oh, it's a total eclipse. It's really heavy. It's not an especially dramatic eclipse. It's going to be dramatic for some, but you can see that there aren't any sort of major aspects going on to the eclipse. You can see that the moon is conjunct the north node, but it's a total eclipse. By definition, we're going to get the sun and the moon in aspect of a nodal axis, so we can't really count that. And the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter, and the moon is applying to a trine of Jupiter. Now, that might be a positive takeaway from the eclipse. The fact that the eclipse is trine Jupiter, and that the moon and Jupiter are in mutual reception with one another, could, for some of us, mean that this eclipse is fortunate. It allows us to get ourselves together, and if we're trying to get something, gain something, then the eclipse should really help us. And so it's not necessarily a bad eclipse. So that's one thing to say about it. And this eclipse is on, I think it's on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. So let's look at the midpoints this eclipse is on. So there is the eclipse. This is on the 90-degree dial. Because it's a 90-degree dial, it comes over as a conjunction, because oppositions become conjunctions from the viewpoint of the 90-degree dial. And so it is on this midpoint of Uranus on one hand and Saturn and Neptune on the other. So don't forget, Uranus is going retrograde. So by the time this eclipse happens on Sunday night, or maybe Sunday afternoon, depending on where you are, or Monday morning if you're in Australia or New Zealand, whenever it happens, the Uranus will already be going retrograde. Or rather, Uranus will be at a standstill. So Uranus has extra power, extra strength. And so you could say that, with the full moon eclipse on the Uranus-Saturn and Uranus-Neptune midpoints, that does create potentially, a few problems. Because Saturn and Uranus, it's very tense, and Uranus and Neptune as well. That's very sort of cosmic. Uranus Neptune can be the sort of breaking down of boundaries and barriers, and so it's not necessarily 100% easy, because it is on the Saturn Uranus. Because it is on the Saturn Uranus midpoint. But when we're looking at this eclipse, we should perhaps be more concerned by the fact that it's happening at the same time as Uranus going stationary retrograde, as I've just said. Here's a chart again, and so Uranus is. You see, Uranus is retrograde now. Uranus has an R. At the beginning, before the weekend, Uranus didn't have an R, and so what that eclipse is doing is it is baking in Uranus. Uranus is all part of the experience, and whatever Uranus is doing, that's affecting us. And so I think that's the main thing happening, and a main thing we should be thinking about. But as an isolated event, I'm not convinced that this full moon eclipse is as dramatic as it seems. Just because it's total doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a super big deal. And if serious events happen over the next week or next couple of weeks, is that going to be just because of the eclipse? I don't think it will just be because of an eclipse. It will be because Uranus is stationary retrograde at the same time as an eclipse. And the next eclipse, I think it's a partial eclipse on is it the 21st? That's a much more interesting eclipse. I mean, that really is powerful. It's what, 29 Virgo. It's aspecting Saturn. It's close to the equinox. Now that is a big deal. Now, as far as what we know what's going to happen next week. In some ways, we know that France is going to be a mess, because we've got a confidence vote in France. We already know that. We already know that Britain is going to have political turmoil because the deputy prime minister has just resigned. So there's a lot we already know. Is this to do with the eclipse, or is it? Yeah, it might be to do with Saturn, with Uranus coming to a standstill. Now, just a couple of people who might be impacted by this eclipse. One person who I've talked about quite recently is the president of Serbia, Alexander Vucic. So Alexander Vucic was born on March the 5th, 1970. So he is a Pisces. You know, since I did my video on Alexander Vucic, you know, I've been sort of reading a bit about him, and you know, he really is a Pisces. He's trying to play everything. He's trying to play both parties. He's trying to be on good terms with the Russians and the Chinese, but he's trying to be on good terms with the Europeans, and he's supplying weapons to Ukraine, and so he's trying to be, you know, all things to all people. And it's a very dangerous game. You know, it's what they say: if you try to walk in the middle of a road, you get run over. But he's done it so far. But how long is he going to last for? And there are these sort of continued protests. I mean, I think there is a view that he will survive. That he's a very sort of canny operator. But you know, this eclipse, this lunar eclipse, is right on Vucic's sun. So the moon will be on his sun, and he in fact has his he's got a sort of nodal return. So he's got the North Node in Pisces anyway. So I think that this eclipse for Vucic and Serbia could be quite important. I mean, I don't have his time of birth. I mean, I don't have a time of birth that I trust. I know there is a time of birth circulating, but it's not really confirmed. So I think that this eclipse could put pressure on Vucic's leadership. I mean, he's already under a lot of pressure, but it just may put even more pressure on him. And someone else, well, Barron Trump. I don't know what we can say about Barron Trump. I mean, he's only 19, and we're only really talking about this perhaps in relationship to his father. But this eclipse is right across his ascendant. He has got he's got ascendant at 1501 Pisces. He's got Mercury at 1430 Pisces. So he's got. So the moon will be right on his ascendant, sun right on his descendant, and hitting his Mercury. I don't know what this is about. It might say something about his relationship to his father, but not necessarily. It may just say something about his studies. He's at university, isn't he? He's got a new academic year starting. So you know, difficult to speculate. And also, he's got Mars square his ascendant. So the eclipse is hitting quite an important sort of point in his chart. So he may feel he has to assert his independence in some ways. Maybe there's a lot of pressure on him from his parents and from other people. And maybe this is an eclipse for Barron Trump where he has some realizations about himself and his situation and what he wants to do. And then I did notice that Sam Bankman-Fried, remember him? He's in prison. He went to prison after the FTX collapse. The FTX was, what was it doing? It was sort of taking money from people for their Bitcoin, but they'd buy Bitcoin, but they wouldn't actually spend the money. They'd use the money for something else. And he's in prison, and he has his son. You know, he's born on March the 5th, 1992. Vucic also born on March the 5th, 1990, March the 5th. So he shares Sam Bankman-Fried shares a birthday with the Serbian president, and so you know, with the eclipse on his sun, if he's in prison, I mean, I don't know how he's doing in prison. I think that people need to make sure he's okay. It can't be much fun being in a federal prison. So that's all I can say. And of course, he was born with a new moon in Pisces, so that could influence him. And finally, there is the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. Mark Carney, born March 16th, 1965, a Pisces. And Mark Carney has a conjunction between the Moon, Mars, and Pluto. And so this eclipse definitely hits Mark Carney in quite a big way. And so you've got the moon opposition, his moon Mars Pluto, the sun hitting it. So I'm thinking there could be some kind of crisis, something he has to deal with. It could be about it could be quite violent. So he might think that we haven't really been talking about Mark Carney recently. He's kind of sort of drifted into the background, but it's possible with this total eclipse, Mark Carney comes sort of back into the fore, and perhaps there's external events happening which he has to pay attention to, and it could be quite stressful for him, and so. Canada moves back into focus maybe with this total eclipse of the moon. And then we have got Uranus going stationary direct. So here's a chart for Uranus going stationary direct, and this is set for London. And so Uranus goes stationary. I keep getting it mixed up. Stationary retrograde. Uranus goes stationary retrograde on September the 6th, 2025. So on Saturday, London time at 5:52 a.m. And so this is a chart for that precise moment that Uranus goes retrograde. And Uranus, you said it for London, it's right on the midheaven, and so maybe that says something about London and what's going on in the UK. And we already know that the UK is a complete mess, with the particularly now that the Deputy Prime Minister has resigned. And this chart for Uranus going retrograde, we also see a similar picture in France. Tale of two cities, London and Paris. So if we relocate Uranus going stationary retrograde to Paris, then we also get Uranus on the midheaven and Mercury on the ascendant. And so you can see that Uranus going stationary retrograde is affecting Britain and France. But we already know this. It's news that's already out. So there are certainly two countries which are definitely, I think, going to be impacted by this event. We already know this. And, as far as France, to continue on the French theme, here is the horoscope of the Fifth Republic. I think this isn't the referendum, but I think this is when it was signed off on. I think this is a chart that Nick Campion gives of the Fifth Republic, which came into being in 1958. And so the Fifth Republic has its Mars at 2 degrees 26 Gemini. So Uranus is going stationary retrograde within 1 degree of the Fifth Republic's Mars. And that Mars is in the second house. And this confidence vote in France is because of money. It's to do with, I think, a budget. France, like Britain, and France are very similar, even though they have this incredible rivalry. There's a huge amount of debt in France, like in Britain. People are always making these comparisons about how both countries are really in a bad position. I mean, France maybe is in a better position because their industry hasn't been quite as wiped out as it has in the UK. But it is a budgetary issue, and Mars is in the second, arguments about money. And so Uranus is going stationary retrograde on the Fifth Republic's Mars. And so that's kind of appropriate just before we have this no confidence motion. And then we have the UK. We just talked about the problems that are going on in the UK. Now, there is a moment when Starmer became leader. So he became leader of the Labour Party on April the 4th, 2020. I mean, he became Prime Minister just over 4 years later. So this is a chart for his leadership. It's also the chart for when Angela Rayner became Deputy Prime Minister, because the Labour Party votes on, sorry, not Deputy Prime Minister, I mean Deputy Leader. So she was Deputy Leader of the party, and then when Starmer became Prime Minister, she became Deputy Prime Minister. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily an automatic connection between Deputy Leader and Deputy Prime Minister, but anyway, she is Deputy Prime Minister. And in this chart, for when Starmer became leader, there was a Mars-Saturn conjunction. So that's not a very good omen for him to become leader of the party, even though he won an election 4 years later. So what has happened is that Uranus has gone stationary retrograde on the Mars-Saturn conjunction of his leadership, and of course it's already working, because Angela Rayner, she's out. She's been knocked out by Uranus going stationary retrograde. And looking at Angela Rayner's chart, I don't have a time for her, but the only thing I noticed is that there was a new moon on the 23rd of August on her Jupiter, and Uranus is now square her Jupiter. And her Jupiter is in Virgo. I mean, we don't know, she may or may not have a Moon-Jupiter conjunction, but Jupiter in Virgo is not a great place for Jupiter. I mean, it doesn't normally matter, but if you're a politician, perhaps it does matter. Jupiter rules Pisces, but in Jupiter and Virgo, it's too it's too petty. It doesn't really have big ideas, and it's in its Earth sign, and so you can see her thinking, oh, maybe she can avoid paying this £40,000 extra pounds for her stamp duty on this property she was buying in Hove, which is sort of part of Brighton, and so on the south coast of the UK, which is miles away from her constituency in northern England. And so maybe that Jupiter in Virgo was what tripped her up. Her Jupiter in Virgo is just too petty, perhaps too concerned about money, saving 40,000 here, and not really seeing it through, and not seeing the principles of the matter. If you are housing secretary, that's your job. You don't play games with stamp duty. You don't think, oh well, maybe it's going to be okay. I don't fully know the rules. I think her advisor told her to go to a tax specialist, but she decided, oh well, it's okay, she'll get around it anyway. She needs to gain that £40,000, and it's just not seeing the larger picture. And maybe it's that Jupiter in Virgo that tripped her up. And she had a new moon on her Jupiter in Virgo, and now she's got Uranus coming to a standstill over the weekend, 1 degree 28 Gemini, pretty close to a square with her Jupiter. And that's about it. I'm going on and on. There's Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. There's rumors that Trump wants to, he's already blown up some drug boat of Venezuela. He's trying to really put a lot of pressure on Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro has his sun at 0 degrees 54 Sagittarius. So that Uranus is going stationary retrograde, opposition his sun. So that puts him in the spotlight and perhaps puts him under a degree of pressure. And finally, there is a politician, she's still in Parliament, but I did notice that her chart was affected by it in the British Parliament. There's a woman called Priti Patel, who is in the Conservative. She's a Conservative politician. There have been rumours that she might defect to Reform. I don't think she will, but here is her chart. I did notice that Priti Patel has her Mars at 1 degree 29 Gemini. I mean, her noon chart. So if you're interested in the minutiae of British politics, it might be of interest that she has Uranus going stationary retrograde on her Mars-Saturn midpoint. Is that going to say something about her ambition, what she feels she needs to do? Is something going to happen in her life? So that's perhaps a politician that we, in Britain, another politician that we need to be looking at. So that's it. That's all I'm going to say about the full moon eclipse and about Uranus going stationary retrograde. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.